Mhm.
And so I've had like a whole bunch of questions that I think we've sort of almost answered like half of them. But I do want to sort of take you back in and sort of just delve a little bit more into like you and your husband, obviously, like, and you've explained that, you know, when you guys met and sort of fairly early on in your relationship, he indicated his desire to join the police force.
Mhm.
And obviously his dad was in the job too. Um, what was like the transition like for you
Ugh.
as a couple to go from him, you know, in civilian life to a first responder role? And I guess sort of what was like the impact on your relationship at that time?
Yeah, I felt like this was maybe coming out earlier, but then when you asked it, I was like, whew, because, I knew him before.
Yeah.
Oh, and then we lived in different cities for a while. And as I watched him experience more and more difficult things, it it drove a wedge between us, to be honest, because I felt like my world was kind of opening, right? I was opening my world to different experiences and places to live and different people, and it almost seemed like his was narrowing, like he didn't trust as many people. He didn't really want to go out that much anymore. Like home was his safe spot. And we were in our mid-20s with no kids. And I'm like, come on, like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? Like, I thought, that I don't know what I thought, to be honest. When I said I didn't know what I was saying yes to, I didn't know what I was saying yes to.
Yeah.
And I was like, he'd come home and say something, and it would be like dark humor or like something that ultimately, was maybe not a belief he had, but was something he did to like keep himself safe. Like, I need to make sure that I think about it this way. And it could be it seemed very close minded, but in his way, that was part of his armor.
Yeah.
And we either didn't figure out, I definitely came across as critical, or I was critical for sure. I was like, you're changing, like you're narrowing, like you're saying things that do not sound like you, because there's a part of society that I did not see, like that he did not let me into, that,
We harden.
that, yeah.
Harden.
And that's what it was. You harden in order to be able to do your job. And, I hear it time and time and again, to do your job well, you have to harden. And like, that was a hard thing because I felt like my walls were starting to come down. Like I was starting to feel safer. And it felt like we were in very opposite places, or that we were going kind of in different directions. And we didn't know how to talk about that. And so I would say it felt like our worlds, especially policing, were very separate at the beginning, because I didn't understand him and he didn't know how to explain these things in a way that he thought that I would understand without being critical.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Does that make sense? Like, it was
Yeah.
just,
No, 100%.
it was, and I think that's a fairly common, experience for people that have known each other beforehand. And even those that do know, like, that enter into a relationship, they can still sometimes say things. And I was like, what? And now I just know. And I'm like, sometimes I still, I just, it's just something that's kind of said in passing. And another time is like, do we need to talk about this somehow? Like, it's like, it's kind of walking this fine line of support and then also still challenging them in a way, like a healthy challenge, like, and without being critical.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I haven't mastered that. Like, I haven't figured out exactly, especially when we're tired or we're stressed or, a certain population of people that he deals with, whatever. Like, I don't always have the answer, but now at least I'll ask and we'll talk about it, and we'll figure it out. Like, I don't have the answer right away. And often he just wants me to listen.
Yeah.
And so we'll often ask, if we find ourselves in really stressful situations and we're venting to each other, we'll be like, okay, do you want me to listen? Do you want a solution? Like, what kind of support do you want from me?
Yeah.
And it sounds weird at first, but to be honest, if you're not aligned with like what, with what each of you is wanting, it can really go off track,
Very much so.
and make things a lot worse.
I think, and I could speak from experience for my, relationship and dynamic. It's striking the balance between support and space. And, my husband was a firefighter for, like 10 over, it's probably somewhere between like 10 and 15 years when we met.
Right.
And so he's very established and established in his habits and ways of coping and all that kind of thing. So I'm just kind of, it's fresh little bunny like thrown into the mix. So it's like, like the one thing that I think we had to, definitely learn, even though I did have some level of insight, was about, okay, like what do you need from me right now? What is going to benefit you? What is going to, like, and I can tell when he walks through the door, I can tell from the look on his face, and like they do 24-hour shifts in the town that he works for. So I mean, like, he's freaking tired when he gets home. They're a busy metropolitan fire department, so they're not just snoozing all night and coming home, fresh and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. But he's not much of a talker, and I am, but I have to accept that that's who he is. And so I think it's about learning, what your partner needs, and actually just, like you're saying, being able to just go like, what do you need right now? And, more often than not, like, it's very just small things. It's space. I put the sauna on for him in the morning so that he can come and sweat out all the adrenaline and cortisol and chemicals and whatever, might have gotten in his body overnight. It's, can I make you a really nice breakfast? You walk the kids to school, I'll make you some scrambled eggs or whatever it is you want. Like, it's like those small little gestures. It's, I need to go lay down and I love you, but I need you not to talk to me for a little while. Cool. And not internalizing that and getting your feelings hurt by that.
Yeah. And that takes a lot of awareness and a lot of personal work to realize that it's not about you.
Yeah.
And that can be hard, right? Like when I'm at my optimal thing, I've gotten enough sleep and I'm eating right, I'm getting enough water, I'm not exhausted, like all these things that just don't happen probably more than once a week. I can show up in that perfect, not perfect way, but like in that way, but it's not always the easiest. And my husband's angry face and tired face are exactly the same. So I was like, like, I can't tell. And like, I'm not, and I thought it was just me. And, but not every morning, but a lot of mornings, my 4-year-old looks at him and goes, "Daddy happy?" And so it's heartbreaking, but at the same time, I'm like, it's not just me.
Yeah.
Like your looks can be confusing at times. Yeah. So, when he comes in the door, it's interesting because we kind of have a back hall and he has a bit of a 30-minute drive. So I feel like he kind of works, works through some things. And, something I'm also interested in learning more about is the things that come home at different stages in a career. So like what comes home in the first 5 years, what comes home in the second and the third, because I find what comes home now or around midway through his career is more so politics. Yeah. It's more so politics than it is the calls that bother him. Then, and I'm not saying that won't ever be the case. But right now it's a lot of that. And it's, it can be just as heavy as some of the calls in a different way. Right. And,
it's even as they got the rank too, it's like a different level of responsibility, and it's different psychological exhaustion of, like when my husband's upgraded at the moment, he's in charge of half the city.
Yep.
that, like, you know, and so then if there's like a job, it's like, you know, I gotta do the da 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 da, and it's
Hmm.
exhausting. It is exhausting, like the more responsibility you have, and it yeah, like it tires him out in a different way.
Yeah, and that's what I say, like, that's kind of how he comes home now a lot, is exhausted. He's also, ending a time in a unit and about
Mm,
to, think about transitioning into a new one. And so transitions are always challenging,
mm-hmm.
I think, for anyone, but for my husband especially, transitions have always been difficult,
Yeah.
especially when you're kind of in an in-between, right? That, like, there's no, you don't know exactly where you're
Yeah.
going, but you know that something's going to
Yeah.
happen.
That
And
uncertainty is, yeah.
oh, yes, not, I mean, I don't know about you, but like police do not like uncertainty. Like, I feel like they go into that because there are laws and you are breaking them, and then this is, and so really understanding how gray life is
Yeah.
has been, a challenge for both of us to
Mm-hmm.
figure out, like, what does this look like. And so I would say that's one of the ways that we support each other the most, is through like the times of the transition, through, needing that validation and appreciation, asking for what we need. Like, I've never had a problem for asking what I need, from my husband, but he does. I don't know whether, or like, where, I have an understanding of where it comes from, but now he's just like, I really just want time to cut the grass, or I really want to go out and do this. But he would never ask that. He'd always
Yeah.
put himself last. And again, I don't think this is every relationship, of course, but it's constant trying to figure out how to support one another,
Mm-hmm.
and to not assume, and to ask for what you need,
Yeah.
right? Like, to say that I want appreciation, I want validation, I want time to
Mm-hmm.
myself. This is how I'm feeling, and has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
And just thinking and assuming that your partner knows that, like,
Yeah.
like, it's such a dangerous thing to do, right? Because you make up stories in your head, your brain wants to fill in those gaps. And then it was something that was very innocent, and then becomes just something so
Yeah,
huge between
magnified. Yeah.
you.
I mean, look, and
Hmm.
how I can show up, you know, with you today and say, like, you know, all of the things that I try to do to support him and help him, and like that's 10 years in the making. You know,
Oh.
like that's
Hmm.
me. I left my country, I left my career, I left everyone I knew and came over here and had no one bar him, and that was a transition. And then so easy to internalize how he would come home and how he would show up, because,
Hmm.
you know, it obviously, like, it affected me because he was my person here. He was like my only person here. And since
Hmm.
then I've created a community and you know, support and all that kind of thing along the way, but it all of that is such a learning curve. And,
Huge.
you know, I think I was sort of looking on your website last night, and it was you wrote about being like somewhat of a people pleaser, which I
Oh.
think I think like a lot
Hmm.
of people can relate to and identify with, and I am very much in that category. So I very much felt that when I read it. And it's sort of, it sounds like you reached a point where you were burnt out and resentful,
Yep.
and you know, we've sort of like spoken about it like a little bit already, but you were like living and existing for your husband and his
Hmm.
responsibilities and your boys and all that kind of thing. And then you were just like you sort of were like, I'm not being truly authentic to who I am and who I want to be and how I want to show up and all that kind of thing. And I know I very much have gone through a similar transition in the last few years. And I don't know whether it's having kids, you know, starting a new career, approaching 40. I think it's like all of the things,
All those things
all of
too.
the
Yeah, I
things.
feel all of those
But,
exactly.
you
Yeah.
know, what sort of was that experience for you? Like, was there a particular turning point? Was there like
Hmm.
something that made it come to a head where you went, you know what, fuck this?
Yeah, and I wish there was some kind of big explosion, that I can look back on and be like, you know what?
Yeah.
That's it. My life was just suddenly different. But I do have a light bulb moment, like, those moments in time where you can remember where you were,
Yeah.
what you were doing. Like I was standing in the playroom and I was putting things away. And, I felt that resentment, that creep up, like, here I am putting things away again, and it's at night and I'm by myself. Um, and then all of a sudden I realized it's because, I have these unmet needs, right? Like I am wearing so many different hats.
Yeah.
I am doing so many things for so many different people. And it started from when I was very young, like being the one that connects the family together, right? That smooths things over, that takes on responsibilities, adult responsibilities when I shouldn't have had to, right? So, but then equally, I've also demanded a lot over time as well. Like I've had, some physical injuries over time, some mental health stuff over time that I've really had to rely on Cam, on my husband, and it's been really difficult for him. And then I think I internalized that as a people pleaser, saying, okay, no, I need to be the one that, gives back, that sacrifices, and didn't even realize I was doing it, right? And I was like, my therapist in our first session, she's like, so who are you? Like, if you're not this, you're not this, you're not that. And I looked at her and I had no answer. I had no clue. And that's probably the most scared I've ever been at my life, is like not knowing who I was.
Yeah.
And I think that was really that turning point of like, okay, I'm gonna dig in deep here and do all the really painful work to figure out like what got me here and how do I live my life differently, because it makes me sound like I'm the one that I sacrificed for my husband and did all this, but I wasn't a very nice person, right? Like when we model what was modeled for us, I didn't have the greatest model. I had someone who had a need to control, and when that control wasn't there, would get angry and would project that onto other people. And so, when I say like, we talk about supporting our husbands, and like I wasn't, and we've had these conversations lately, I wasn't the greatest partner for a long time. And it wasn't until I really peeled back all of this stuff, right? Some of the stuff that coaching can help with, some of the stuff that therapy can help with, right? Because we really have to understand the difference between those two. Because I personally believe that everyone should be in therapy. That's just my own thing. Like, I strongly believe in coaching. But as someone who's experienced childhood trauma, I think, from that side of it, I think coaching is a wonderful way to build on them. They can coexist.
Yeah.
But
they're very different needs.
it met a very different need for me, for sure. And I also can't assume that everyone has experienced childhood trauma like me. I think because, sometimes you think you've experienced something, you're like, well, everyone has had to experience this as well, and everyone needs this.
Yeah.
So I'm careful to say that, but it's not just one thing or the other.
Yeah.
But I do know the path that resentment and anger can take you down. And I know what it looks like if I had not changed.
Yeah.
So, the last thing I want is to be seen as this like shiny example of someone who did everything right. Because, our motto in this house is we make mistakes every day.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, as a coach, like, you're not going to get someone that shows up. Like, I'm going to try my best to show up 100% for you every day, but I don't have it all figured out. I am still learning. I am still making mistakes. And, if you're looking for someone who has it all figured out, I'm not for you, but I work really hard to show up for my clients and to show up for people that, really need and deserve support. And, that's really, really what I want to do. And it's great. It's a wonderful relief to feel like you don't have to people please or aim for this unattainable perfection.
Yeah.
Um,
No, but again, like you're showing up as authentically yourself and going through this
mhm,
transition and having that realization. And I like one thing that really sort of was banging around in my head when you were talking about it, like resentment and anger and unmet needs, like it's also a kind of grief, and
it
it's
is.
showing up
Mhm,
with resentment and with anger and all of that kind of thing. And I know I've probably like experienced some of like the similar things as well. And I came at it from like different perspective, but it was like I lost a lot of confidence when I came over here because
mhm,
everything I knew, and slowly built it back up. And it was kind of, and I think when we have children as women, I think it's just part of our biological makeup that we
mhm,
default and we go into that carer role, and we put everyone first, and that generally ends up encompassing our husbands because we're so in that carer mode that it just automatically defaults, and they fall into that category too. But I think part of my sort of I don't want to use the word journey because it sounds terrible.
I know, I don't like that word either. I'm like,
like I guess like like realization or like turning point,
mhm,
or that kind of thing was like I'm I'm allowed to be important too. My
mhm,
needs, my wants, my desires, my goals, it doesn't negate the importance of things for my husband or things for my
mhm,
kids, and I still show up in that capacity, but I don't have to be last. What
no,
I want and what I
mhm,
need is also important, and it's and even kind of like very like minor changes, but yeah, like n- knowing that you deserve to, you know, be important and be a priority, and actually like instigating that for yourself is sort of two very different things. And as well, like even for me it was like, oh, babe, like do you mind if, or is it okay if I go out on like this night? So,
mhm.
and that in 10 years has changed to, I'm going out Tuesday night.
Yeah, don't see anything in the calendar,
Yeah.
right? And so even my husband has been able to start doing that. Like, oh, I want to go out here; it's in the calendar. He would have never done that
Yeah.
before for whatever reason,
Mm.
right? And oh gosh, I had something in my head, and
Sorry.
it just no, it's not you. My some things leave my head, and they'll come back, but and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
But it's gosh, it's a wild ride. I wouldn't, I wouldn't choose
Yeah.
anything differently, especially with how close we've gotten, even in the last
Yeah.
few months. Like I said, having that space like dedicated for connection, so we don't have to listen to our children's awful shows, and then we're just on our phones because like you're not going to be like talking. There's a child in the middle of you, and like so that's one of the best things we ever did is like finding just a little spot for us.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be expensive. Like we had the room, we bought a couple chairs secondhand, and then that was
Yeah.
it. Right. And so to carve out that, that actual physical space that will allow you to connect,
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't really have that before. Like maybe on another level, but you're generally not going to go to another level
Yeah.
when your kids are young.
Yeah.
And when you talked about putting yourself first, one of the ways I do this that feels so good, and it has yet to lose its luster, is showering before my children when my husband works evenings.
Yeah.
And like, so they're upstairs having a snack. Of course, they're old enough that I'm not really
Yeah.
worried about the choking. They mostly eat frozen yogurt tubes. So like, if it'll melt, someone come get me. Like, all of a sudden,
Yeah.
there's neglect happening here. But like, just having that shower before them, I'm like, I matter too.
Yeah.
And then like, I can go to bed at the same time as them. I clean up everything I need to, and my day ends at their day. I'm not staying up for 2 hours and cleaning up and doing all the things, right? I think there's sometimes this expectation, or a lot of people do, like after the kids go to bed, you do all of the other stuff. And again, do what works for you.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't feel good, do something different. Like I'm sorry, I will sacrifice 5 to 10 minutes with my kids to maybe finish the dishes and to clean up the main floor and have it look nice for when I come down the next day.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I can get that time back reading.
Yeah.
And not putting myself last also is, and this is what I feel like really starts to irk people a little bit is, what we're teaching and showing our children. Right. And I think that's a hard one because I have shown them a lot of things that it's almost like to not do. I feel like over the years, but now I more consciously think like, what do I want them to see as, the responsibilities of a man, a woman, a human, what do I want them to see? And, we've been really clear on what our family values are and their kindness, and they will see my husband and I argue from time to time, like, we don't swear at each other, but we do raise our voices and like, we want them to see that this is life, that there are conflicts, that things are hard, that daddy cooks and cleans, if that's what the values are that we want to pass down to them, that things aren't just not done for them, that life doesn't always come easy, that we're not going to plow down every conflict that comes their way. Right. And so everyone has different ways that they want to raise their children. And as long as everyone is safe and cared for, like, but I often think about that now, like the way that we existed before as a couple, me and us prioritizing ourselves last. Like I actually get to say, mommy's going to sit down and enjoy her coffee. And in 5 minutes, I will get up and get you your second breakfast. You've already had one, like I get to sit down. Right. And I think sometimes we run around so much on this autopilot for our children and we do so much for our children, I think, compared to at least what I experienced, right? And, that we're also careful not to do too much. Like at what point do we tell them to get their own water bottle out of the fridge? Like those little things. But, it's important for them to see you act in a way that you think, hey, when they grow up, I really want them to value this or to do things like that. And like we've said a couple of things, unless we model it for them, how will they know? Right? How will they know that this is the way that, we think it's important to live? So I think that's when I talk about it, that generates probably the most, like, I'm going to call it excitement, right? Because I think people think that we're telling them how to raise their children, right? But I do think there's a disconnect sometimes in what we model and then what we expect from our children, right? We expect something different, even though we haven't acted any differently.
No, and I'm right.
And so,
I'm a big proponent for like leading by example, and sort of my kids haven't known me in their life to like have had a full-time job and like they know that I was a cop, but they haven't seen that as part of my existence. And now I'm they don't see sort of any of the work that I do, but they see me study like every day. And so yesterday I was like sitting at the dining table and I picked up one kid and the other one gets picked up later, and so my eldest and I was sitting at the table doing our homework together. I was watching university lecture and he was doing like some math homework, and it's like, yeah, this is what it is, buddy. And then you were saying like the one thing I choose to do for myself is I get up at like 5:30 in the morning and I work out in my basement, because then I have done something for myself for that day that I love, that I enjoy, that is just as much for my mental health as my physical health. And that's something that like I choose to do to keep my equilibrium, and my youngest tends to sort of come down sometimes. And I was sort of like towards the end of, my workout, I'm like, was running on my treadmill after doing some weights and stuff. And he goes, Mama, can I come down and work out with you every morning? And in my head, I'm like,
nope.
I'm just going, I'm like, you're always welcome down here, buddy. Like, whatever you want to do. And he goes, well, I want to come down and work out with you every morning because I want to be strong like you, Mama.
Oh.
And he said that to me on Mother's Day, and I was like, well, that's all I need. And I'm like, okay, so like part of the reason part of the like the extrinsic reason of like why I work out is to give them that example that, you know, to be fit, to be healthy, to be, you know, all of those kind of things, to be able to be active with them involves me maintaining a certain level of fitness. And
Mm,
like it's kind of getting through to my 4-year-old.
I know.
Like that
It's
that's kind of
beautiful when,
cool.
you know, the things that you kind of consciously do, they pick up on, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, a similar example with making mistakes, right? Because we, you know, he's like, "Mommy, you just said that wrong," or like,
Yeah.
"Daddy, you did that wrong," and we're like, "Yeah, guess what? We make mistakes." Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I don't want him to see us as perfect, right? That's the last thing I want him to be, because then he might feel like he needs to
Yeah.
be, and we both experience that feeling of
Yeah.
like needing, you know, for whatever reason, whether it be on purpose or not, of the
Mm-hmm.
need to really be perfect or to not be able to make a mistake.
Yeah.
And we were going somewhere to soccer or something, and we were in the car, and I did something. I'm like, "Yeah, I make a mistake." You know, I said, "Do you make a mistake?" And he jumped out of the car and goes, "Every day." And I was like, "Oh my
No.
gosh!" Like, I would have given anything,
Yeah.
you know, to think about that being me 30 years ago, to be able to jump out and say, "I make mistakes every day."
Mm.
Like, you know, that's probably only been embraced in the last few years of my life. And I still have a hard time making a mistake. That, like, people pleaser perfectionism in me that's hardwired, right, for like survival or whatever, can come out really strong.
Yeah.
And so, but he doesn't have to overcome that
Yeah.
now, because he's always been, you know, I hope, feels like he can make a mistake and
Yeah.
still be loved, right? He can still be accepted. He's still worthy and enough, and
Mm-hmm.
all of those things that we all are, that for one reason or another, you know, we've maybe lost along the way, or, you know, have doubted
Yep.
at some point,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. We have something
So,
sort of similar that I do with my kids. I'm like, I never shy away from apologizing to my kids.
oh, I
Just
all the
yeah,
time.
just because I'm a parent,
Hmm.
just because I'm an adult, because then it shows like you're like, yeah, everyone makes a mistake. Everyone sometimes needs to admit that they're wrong and give an apology. It doesn't matter who it is,
Hmm.
doesn't matter what the context is. So me showing that like I don't always have to be right. I can be
No,
wrong
that's a big thing
and
too.
I can apologize. It,
And it's you know, it's something that I feel like a lot of adults don't do, right? Like, a lot of adults don't apologize.
mm-hmm.
And we've even been a thing like, "Well, I didn't do it on purpose." And I said, and that's great, right? It's still a mistake or
Yeah,
an accident, but we still apologize for it.
yeah,
Right? Like,
exactly.
you know, of course you apologize if it's a deliberate something that hurts someone, like that's on a different level, but we
Mm-hmm.
still apologize for
Yeah,
mistakes.
very much so.
My youngest ran, they have an electric quad, and when I say
Yeah,
electric, it's like ATV. It's not like the $300 ones you get from a big box store. It's like a full EV vehicle, and ran it into the bumper of our neighbor's car the other
oh
day.
no.
And so his first level of taking responsibility was like having to be walked up with Daddy to the
Mhm.
door and knock on the door and
Oh
say,
dear.
you know, "I ran into your car."
Yeah,
You know, and with the hope that if that were to happen 10, well, not, hopefully he's not driving at 14, but if he were like in 14 years, that he would do the same thing,
yeah,
that he would leave the note, knock on the door. You
yeah,
know, did he cry for 25 minutes after? Absolutely. And not because we yelled at him, but because he felt bad.
yeah, yeah,
Right. And but at the same time, I'm like, that's okay.
yeah.
My job is not to prevent my child from feeling these things.
Nope.
It's to comfort them. It's
Mm-hmm.
to say, "You're still a good boy. Like,
Yeah,
mistakes are totally okay, but we do need to talk about them, and we do need to say we're
yeah,
sorry." Right. Like, these are the things that, you know, I'm hoping will, you know, be the building blocks of
yeah,
their values, right?
yeah.
That I can,
I 100%
you
agree.
know, share and pass on, and that I'm figuring out at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Like, some of these things that I'm doing when I'm parenting, I'm like, that's a good idea. I should try that for me.
But I think there's beauty in being, you know, like a work in progress. You know, I
Oh,
don't think
constantly.
anyone ever has it all figured out. And I think I mentioned it to you sort of before we started that like there was just sort of going back to, you know, the built up of resentment and all that kind of thing. And you posted something on your Instagram stories, and it was like one of my favorite quotes. And it's, you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think that it's almost like should be the, you know, motto of like a first responder spouse, to be able to know that there's room to manage everything, but that we're going to make mistakes. We're going to be a work in progress. It's okay to say sorry, but it's also okay for you to know that you're important and everything else can
Mm-hmm.
be important too, but doesn't have to be more important than you. And you don't have to deplete yourself in order to make everything else exist at the same time.
Yeah, and I love that this can be interpreted probably in a few different ways, right? Because when I heard that phrase, and it all depends on what's going on in
Mm,
your life at the moment,
yeah.
or your experiences. But for me, it's like spending so much energy on people and on
Mm-hmm.
behaviors. Maybe it's trying to change someone. I don't know what it
Yeah.
is, or by trying to please someone that you have no control over, or trying to prevent someone from being hurt, right? So we all, whether it be our child or someone, like we don't want people to hurt, but at the same time, we're not doing them any favors by, making everything just feel not easy, but like let me just mow down every conflict in your way, because that's not real life, right? And I
Adversity
do feel
builds
like
character and resilience and all of the things, and otherwise you're robbing them of that.
you really are. Like I did this for my sister, right? I held her up. I'm like, let me help you. We've had a rough go at life. Like I will take care of you. And some of that is a role that that we were both put in, that we didn't ask for.
Mm-hmm.
And other times was like I did her a disservice by not allowing her, not to fall, but to kind of figure out things on her own. Like, would she have figured it out sooner? Would she? I don't know. It's hard to say, right? But I do know that it's a lot harder in the short term to see people suffer,
Oh,
right? To see people
100%.
hurt. It's hard at any point to see that. But if you can see that in the long run,
Mm-hmm.
that putting your energy into boundaries, right? And figuring out, how do I support this person without, either enabling them or doing them a disservice,
Yeah.
but then being there for comfort, right? Being there to be empathetic, to say, like, I know that this is really hard
Mm-hmm.
for you, and that, like, I'm here for you,
Yeah.
but they still have to kind of go through it.
Yeah.
But man, that is a skill that I have definitely not mastered. I've
Yeah.
gotten better at doing. And that's one of the things that I also coach on,
Mm-hmm.
because I think a lot of first responder spouses and a lot of moms, we, we just want to take the hurt away. It's our nurturing. It's our, it's the way that we were programmed a lot of. And we always talk about how exhausted we are as moms. And like, I can't change all of those. I can't prevent your baby from waking up in the middle of the night. But like understanding where your energy goes and where your boundaries are, like those are things that I can support, because that's what's really going to give you that, like that energy and that
Mm-hmm.
freedom, and allow you to show up for yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I think people say that a lot, like show up for yourself, but to say it and to experience it are different.
Well, and I'm
Mhm.
also, to like add one thing to that list from my perspective, I'm a big proponent for self-compassion. That
Oh,
that
oh my
changed
gosh.
my parenting journey when
Hmm.
I discovered it, when I learned about it, when I began to incorporate it into my life. When, I'm at that point where, my husband might be on like a 24-hour shift and I'm one up with like two young kids, and I'm going to lose my freaking mind because, one of them was teething and one of them was doing this or
Hmm.
whatever else. And just like taking a minute and just, you know, different things work for different people. Like I've heard some people, you know, go, okay, what would you tell your best friend in this situation if they were going through it? Because sometimes like that's a way that you can kind of get through to your own mind, that you'd be like, well, if your bestie came and was going through A, B, and C, you'd be like, babe, it's okay. You know, you're alone. It's a tough day. Just accept it for what it is. Da 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 da. Like, but you know, just allowing myself to kind of go, all right, like it's a tough day. Things aren't going to be perfect. And that's okay because it's a day, it's one day. And
Mm-hmm.
just cope in the best way that you can and try to
Mm-hmm.
do better the next day.
Yeah, and just say like, you know what, and still trying to figure out where I am on, the positivity train. It's like some days just suck.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, some days just suck, and no matter what I do, it's gonna suck. And but guess what? That day is gonna end, and like tomorrow's not gonna suck so bad.
Yeah.
Or, sometimes part of a day can be really sucky, and then it can end really well
Yeah.
too, right? So I think sometimes we get stuck into this
Yeah.
is how it is, and the rest of my day is gonna be like that, or the rest
Mm-hmm.
of my week, or the rest of my
Yeah.
year, when like trying to convince yourself that what. I'm just gonna try to do everything I can to have a good day. Like just let it go. Just go to bed early.
Yeah.
Like just say today was not my day. And maybe tomorrow will be better, or figure out how to support yourself.
Yeah.
But I would say one of the things that really turned things upside down on myself and
Mm-hmm.
my own beliefs was when, and I still don't have an answer for exactly what self-care looks like, to be honest. And it changes for me all the time. Sometimes it's brushing my teeth. Like I brushed my teeth this morning. That is awesome. I didn't do that till last night.
Yeah.
It can change depending on your season of life. Like maybe it's like letting yourself watch Netflix and letting your kids watch something in front of the TV. Maybe that's your self-care.
Mm-hmm.
But what I realized last year, because I was like, why am I not doing my yoga? Or no, it was this year actually. How am I still? I'm thinking it's last year. I was like, I'm not doing this and I'm not doing that. And my therapist was like, since when has self-care been meaning adding more? Like, what if it means actually taking away things? Like having less expectations? And I was like, mind
Yeah.
blown. Like I was always like, what's your physical self-care plan, your spiritual self-care plan? And I still think those are important, right? To have an understanding of what taking care of yourself looks like. But sometimes it's not adding more, right? Like a lot of the ways that we take care of ourselves as a first responder family, keep our mental and physical health doing, is like actually removing things from our life. Like our life, our plans, our schedule.
Yeah.
Like sure, we have soccer on Fridays, but if we don't feel like going, we don't go.
Yeah.
Like if we don't have the energy to wake up and do something in the morning, like we don't do it. Like our favorite days are the days that we have nothing planned and we get just to do whatever we want.
Yeah.
And so life's not always like that. Like we also tell our sons, I'm like, yeah, we're tired too, but we still got to go to work and you still got to go to school.
Yeah.
But every once in a while you get to stay home.
Yeah.
And so it's just figuring out that
being able to
all
acknowledge
of that.
when your cup is full is
Yeah.
important. And I think sort of like in a similar vein, like one of my, I wouldn't necessarily call it like a self-care thing, but for me it was, I would, I think probably like a leftover from being a first responder, like being resilient is it's important, because otherwise you will just be crushed under the weight
Mm-hmm.
of so many things. And equally, being a spouse can sometimes require that level of resilience too. And having it like a challenging time, and then you don't want to face it, or you don't want to deal with those emotions, and so you kind of push it away, and I'm okay, and I'm going to stay busy, and I'm going to just like ignore it and hope it goes away, or whatever else. And till you reach the point where like the tiniest thing makes you explode and lose your shit because you have not dealt with it. And like a few years ago, I sort of just like changed tactics, and sometimes I feel homesick and can get upset for varying reasons. But now, if I can like realize and acknowledge that, like, I'm in a certain point in, or like a certain mindset where it's like today's just, it's just a tough day. I'm emotional, I'm upset, I'm this or that, like whatever. I give myself the day. I
Mm-hmm.
just give myself a day, and I'm allowed to be sad. I'm allowed to
Yep.
cry. I'm allowed to acknowledge that I'm having a tough time, but it's just the day, because
Yep.
then I feel all of my things, and then I get to get up, and it's like it allows like that weight to come off you, that like emotional burden, because
Mm-hmm.
when you're like trying to push it away, I think it just kind of feels like it gets heavier. So when you just like acknowledge it, like you accept it and acknowledge it, and I know there's a form of like therapy, sort of based around that, but
Oh. Mm-hmm.
accepting, yeah, I'm sad, I'm homesick, my husband's being a dick, like, and I'm upset over
Yep.
that, like accepting it and allowing it to exist and process it,
Yep.
and then go, all right, I'm going to go to bed. I've had the day, but when I get up
Mm-hmm.
tomorrow, let's soldier on. Let's get on with it.
Yeah, no, and I love that. And I've been, because when you keep it in, the energy that you spend keeping it in is way more than letting it out. But I think like it's the vulnerability, right? It's the feeling safe. It's the all of those things, even within yourself,
Yeah.
right? Like it's not like even with someone else. And I know when I feel sad, what I do looks very different than what my husband does, and it took me so long to see them both as valid. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, you know what? You're not working through your pain if you're not crying all the time. You must not be doing it right, like, or, when we've each experienced, a similar loss. So, like, we lost a baby between the boys. He built a deck and I cried.
Yeah.
But like for me, his version, I'm like, what do you mean building a deck is your form of grieving? Like,
Yeah.
that's ridiculous. Like, you need to be crying like me. And we had very different responses to it, but it took me a long time to be like,
Yeah.
that is so valid. Like, whatever you need to do to move through this in
Yeah.
a healthy way, because of course we all know that there are lots of unhealthy ways, right? And
Very much.
especially in this lifestyle that, and there were things that I did that he didn't think was valid or that was really scary, right? Like if he sees me kind of feeling like I'm having an anxiety attack, it can be pretty scary now, or not nearly as scary as before. So just seeing them as valid, I think is and that's also what makes it tricky, right? When we say, like, when we see our partners changing, or we see them coming home and acting differently, right? It's more complicated because are they dealing with this in a healthy way or an unhealthy way? But I haven't seen them like this before. So what does this mean?
Yeah.
And like, that's really where the courage to like have those conversations. Because even when we were both grieving the same thing, we didn't talk about it. Right. And so I think it's said in so many ways, but like communication really does make or break a marriage. And,
Especially
people,
the one.
yeah, especially first responder ones, because there's so much layered on top of it, right? Because you don't have the time, because you know what, you see what happens at work. It's like, well, look at what these people are dealing with at work. Like, look at my home life. It's amazing, right? But then really underneath of it, there's a lot of stuff that needs to be worked on. But sometimes because of what you see at work, you're like, well, like, look at what I get to come home to.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think that's a piece of it too, that makes it harder, because you do see such different sides of life. Right. And yeah.
Yeah. I think and it is, and it's one of those things that two things can be true at the same time. They could be having an awful experience, and whatever's going on in your life is also still valid. Doesn't have to be equal to, or it's just that this is your reality and that is their reality, and you don't have to equate the two to have them both be valid. And I think that
I know. And like that mixing though is like such a high level of awareness and, self-regulation. And it's something I am still working on, that like both can be true, right? Because that feeling, and maybe this is different for people that have been able to regulate their emotions for whatever reason, but I have not. Like I'm literally regulating myself as I regulate my children. And, you know, so mixing those, that both things can be true, is it takes a lot of experience and practice and, you know, therapy and coaching and all sorts of things. And maybe in the show notes we can, you know, one of my favorite books is by Brene Brown that actually explains feelings in a way that anyone can understand them. And I always keep my I don't know if you have this one, but like it has helped me so much. It's called Brene Brown Atlas of the Heart. Yeah. And like, this is really what helped me like mix my feelings and understand, like, because my therapist is like, how do you feel? And I'm like, good. She's like, that's not a feeling. I was like, oh, okay. What's a feeling? You know, I think sometimes we don't understand what that is. And like, you know, understanding that resentment is an unmet need, right? It's not actually your partner all the time. It can be, right? But there's so much behind it that we don't understand because we don't actually know what we're experiencing, I think, at times. But I mean, that could take us down a whole other road, I'm sure.
I know. I'm just laughing at the fact you pull out like a Brene Brown book, because the what's it, like the inspiration behind the title of the podcast is from a Brene Brown quote from the Gifts of Imperfection.
Oh, that's why I recognized it. I was like, what? That sounds so familiar.
Yeah, so it's the quote is, only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others. Compassion becomes real when we recognize our shared humanity. And so from that, like I listened to like audiobooks a lot, and like I actually like stopped whatever I was doing and like paused it and was just like, I have to like go back and re-listen and write that down, and it resonated like so deeply for me as I sort of like started going through this like kind of coaching journey and making me want to, you know, do it for first responders and their spouses. And that's where it came from. Like, I will hold space for your darkness. That I can, you know, I'm comfortable with my own darkness. I'm comfortable with the things I've experienced, and I'm not perfect. And like we've said, I'm still a work in progress, but I am at a level where I know that I am healthy and that I can hold space for your darkness, and I can confidently do that in a way that it's not going to impact me negatively, but it's hopefully going to help you in a positive manner.
And that is such a, it's hard to describe what that space feels like until you're in it, because I feel like I am now. Like I call my life right now beautiful chaos, because it is just, because just calling it chaos, it's beautiful. I'm probably stretched in more ways than I ever have been, yet because of all the work that I've been able to do, I still have a lot of space, right? And so it doesn't mean that it's it doesn't give me, you know, a little bit of like nervousness to think about opening up that space for people, right? Because there's so much going on. But that's also life. And, you know, when I call it beautiful chaos, it feels very valid, because this is, I don't want necessarily think, well, I don't know. Sometimes I want things to be different, but it is, it's saying like things can be difficult and challenging, and I can still recognize every day that I have a beautiful life, right? A beautiful life that I've had, just that I've been able to create for myself and my husband. And, you know, and people say like, oh, you're so lucky. And I'm like, well, I mean, I think we're lucky. I'm lucky I met him, but the rest of it is not luck, right? Like, I don't have a husband that makes my kids lunches because I'm lucky, right? Like, you know, and we touched on it a little bit before, but it's almost like it's an unspoken expectation or just love or partnership. And it's a way that we support, each other, right? And so and that's what, and and that's what works for us.
Yeah.
Right. But I do know that there's lots of couples out there, first responder couples, that things aren't working for them. And then I think that's where we have the ability to really support them,
Yeah.
right? And to show them that this is possible, right? And that they can do it in their way, not our way.
Exactly.
That they can do it in a way that works for them.
Yeah. And that is an excellent pivot to the last thing that I want to focus on with you, because I have taken up a lot of your time already, Chrissy.
Oh my gosh, I could talk about this all day long.
I know,
I mean,
right? If only it like ticked over a certain time and we'd be getting on the wines together, I feel.
Totally.
But so yeah, tell me about Police Wife Academy. Obviously it's come from you doing your coaching, but for someone who's like, oh, like what's that, sort of give them like a bit of an overview of what it's going to entail, and I guess like what your hope for it is for that sort of population.
Yeah. So, oh my goodness. And I will say I still don't have it all figured out. That's why I said it's coming September 2024, but I still have like a lot of kind of those details, but I just want it to just be so valuable, to be something that people can't wait to show up for, that they learn, that they connect, that they think like, wow, I'm just so happy I had this. Yeah. Right. And then when I was thinking about what it would look like to deliver it, I went back and forth so often on what this looked like. But like, how do I do it in a way that people want to show up for it, in a way that they get something from it, that they get connection, that they feel, a little bit more prepared for this life, that they feel validated, that they feel connected, all of those things. And so what I kind of, I do know for sure at this point is that there'll be some sort of like self-paced kind of learning about a topic. Maybe it is something like communication routines or whatnot that just says like in general, here's what they are. Or, because I think sometimes we assume, because we've been down, or at least I know I have, because been down this professional development, personal development path for so long, that like communication is just a given. Like we know what active listening is, we know what paraphrasing is, we know what all of these things are, but I really don't know if they're as common as we think they are, because sometimes I'll say things and I'm like, oh no, not everyone knows that. I'm like, okay, all right, I got to back up a little bit here, because, this is just something that I've been doing for so long that you just kind of assume that other people have been. And not to say that this is the best way, but to not assume that, you're going to jump in right away kind of to, at a level that everyone's going to be able to understand. Yep. So to give a little bit of that background, and not to be school, but it's going to be engaging. It's not going to be like long, and then it's almost like the basis of a conversation. We'll get together a couple days later as a group and just talk about it and learn from each other. And it's going to be, probably have a little bit of structure, but not at the same time. Like I really want it to feel almost like a dialogue, like kind of what we have here a bit. And then, go off, kind of do whatever, we've talked about that week. Maybe it's those communication routines, and, try it out, see what works for you. And then, know that there's going to be challenges, and then next week bring them to me and we'll talk about it one-on-one. Yeah. Right. And let's figure out something that works for you. And so like adding all of those modalities and like providing that level of value, I think was important to me, to feel like it can be something that can work for a lot of different people and fulfill a lot of needs, right? I think sometimes we have completely online, self-paced, and I was like, I don't know, I buy a lot of these things and sometimes I don't do a lot of these things, and and then there's group components and one-on-one, and who knows, I may do it the first time and be like, this didn't really work. But like, that's my intention at this point, is to try to blend it together, and to, help support and prepare for some of the the big things and the little things of, you know, a police life that really have a huge impact. So like kids will be there, finances will be there. You know, the undercurrent of that resentment will be there,
Yeah.
right? Like those big things that, and the big things and the little things that make a huge impact on a marriage, right? How not to, you know, not make their job the center of your existence, because we see that, you know, I see this all the time, right, where this happens. And you know, at the end of the day, you know, I don't want to call it just a job, but like it's going to be the two of us here. Like we're eventually going to retire, it's going to be the two of us. And so it needs to be the two of us now. And how do we ensure that we're together the whole way? And revolving our lives around one person's career or the other is not our way of doing that. So and being careful not to apply myself for like things that I've done on other people. And I will say that that's something I'm constantly working on, is because saying I don't have it figured out and then talking like I don't have it all figured out sometimes can be are not always aligned. So you know, I think the group will probably hold me, keep me really honest. And that's why I want to do a lot of validation, a lot of talking to police wives, a lot of workshops and things like that, to really say, like, I have so many things I can talk about, but like, what are your things? Like, what are the big things for you? Because it's not for me, right? Like maybe I'm creating something I wish I had, but it's not for me. And I think just reminding myself of that is going to keep me, kind of keep me on the right path, and keep making sure that I'm, you know, that I'm doing the right thing, and that I'm here for the right reasons.
And that totally makes sense. And I think it's a fine line between, you know, sharing your experience because you're trying to share that benefit and that wealth of knowledge and experience, but not projecting, like, but no, I think, and like, you know, as someone who like literally just hearing about it, you know, sort of for the first time, I actually really like the idea of having that, even if it isn't necessarily like the you know, like the self-paced learning thing, even getting them to do like a questionnaire or something before they come in to do group coaching, because then their brains are going to have been like ticking over, and it's like, what part of that resonated with you the most? And oh, well, this resonated with me, and I've been a police wife for like 20 years, but like this part resonated with someone who's only been, you know, for 6 months. So
I like that.
Like, you know, the way that you're structuring it, and you know, like you're saying, trying to create like that community, and then also then, you know, the following week being that one-on-one like resource. You know, I think it sounds wonderful, and I'm really, really excited
and
for you and happy for it.
Oh, I like that. Yes, it's all about awareness. I feel like there's so much that just comes down to that awareness. And so, you know, as part of the program, also being able to support kind of between, because this is a lot, right? If you think about like police life on its own, first responder life on its own is a lot. And so when you're talking about topics that are big and kind of vulnerable, and it's going to require, you know, a potential level of support. So there'll be some, you know, like Vox or app support between, where they can just be like, hey, I'm really stumped here. Like, I don't want them to have to wait, you know, maybe 2 weeks until their next one-on-one to like ask about things like that, right? So to really feel, I think, is that they have the support. Like that's what I really want it to come down as, is, and be seen as, is that like that supportive person that can help them, guide them through these things. And like I said, not have to take 10 or more years, and a lot of arguments and a lot of tears and a lot of other things. Like there's, you know, life's hard enough as it is. You know, we can do things that can make it a lot easier.
You're kind of just like trying to like, you know, give them the cheat sheets.
Like you don't have to be like, I've signed up and I'm going to do things the hard way all the time. You know, you don't get a trophy at the end of the day for, you know, making sure that your life is as hard as it possibly can
Yeah.
be. I think we're now getting to a point, I think our generation is now saying like, no, like I want help cleaning my house, or I'm going to hire someone to do those windows, or hire someone to open my pool. Like these are all three things that we've done now that free up our energy and our time for like each other and other things. So
I love that. That's awesome. So I will pop your Instagram handle, your website, any contact info that you want me to pop in there. Are you like at the point where you're like accepting either like applications or interest in when this is launched? Have you already like got people in? Like what's someone listens to this or sees it on Instagram and goes, hey, that sounds like something I really need right now. What's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Yeah, so just send me a message on Instagram. I'm having lots of conversations. I haven't opened the doors for enrollment, but it really was getting that announcement out there, very much saying like, hey, this is coming. I feel like this is a need, and also like really almost saying like, I'm doing this. Like putting it out there is almost like that accountability for me as well, that I'm going to be doing this. And the response has just been incredible, both like on the actual posts and then also I had a few hours where I had to kind of go offline afterwards, and I came back on and I was like, there's so many messages, and not, of people interested, but then also, people like you reaching out to say this is so exciting. And so that just lets me know that this is like something that is needed and that people are excited about. So it really is just having conversations, and that it's not like I'm waiting till fall to start supporting people. Like I've had, I'm a big believer. I'm like, I don't hold back. It's not like I hold back my best stuff for when I have a coaching client. I really am an open book. So if someone wants support, if they're experiencing some sort of challenge, like just send me a message. And I love it. It lights me up. It doesn't necessarily always need to equal dollars. It's not about the dollar signs, right? To be honest, it's about the fact that this is really fulfilling for me and feels like it's a purpose, a calling. Like I almost didn't have a choice in doing this, because it's something that it's, and I feel like maybe you feel very similarly, right? So, so yeah. And long story short, just send me a message. Just send me a message and we'll chat. I still don't have all those things figured out, but I promise as soon as I know when that enrollment looks like, I am going to be doing a little bit of a test group, like a test fast group, at, kind of a rock bottom price, because they're going to be my people that kind of help me work out the kinks and kind of go through it with me and give me lots of really good feedback. And so I hope to do that in the summer. To kind of run people through kind of a shortened, fast-tracked version, and then be able to do kind of that full launch, come into the doors for, early fall. That's the plan as of now.
How
we all know
long is like the program going to be, or is that still like in progress too?
I mean, I've had it, you go back and forth between models and things in your mind all the time. And so, originally I had this as like a 10-week thing. And then I'm like, oh, but if I want to do every other week, like it was 20 weeks, I'm like, oh, okay, we need to figure out something here. So I think what I'm going to do is take that and really figure out what's the most impactful, what's the most important, what are people telling me that they want to be in there. And then, but I can anticipate it being about 3 months. Like I somehow have that 3-month kind of, timeline in my head. And so how that shakes out, I'm not sure, but that way it's like, the September, October, November, and, then it kind of wraps up from there. So, and then I also just anticipate having a community just continue somehow. Like I have a really hard time with like, okay, it's been your 3 months, we'll see you later. And so also understanding, what it looks like for me to kind of have boundaries and not take on too much, but still be able to provide a community for people, is something I'm still kind of mulling over too. So,
No, that makes total sense. And I love the sound of it. And additionally, like, you need time to implement new things into your life. Like it's so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like having that process and the support like along the way is definitely going to be like super beneficial. And I'm very
Mm.
excited to hear more
So,
about it
I know.
as it goes along.
You will. You'll hear more about it. And, and now that I've put it out into the universe, it's like you said, that accountability, that working out in the basement,
Yeah.
right? That you've said you're going to do this. And I've told my boys I'm supporting other, police spouses and that this is what I'm doing. And so, it feels incredible. Like I was put on this earth to do this.
Yep.
And so, that really helps it come through, I think, when you're building and when you're thinking about things, and just making sure that I'm doing it for the right reasons.
That's great. Awesome.
So
I love it. All right. Well, I have
mm.
taken up a lot of your time today, Chrissy. So I
Oh,
really,
you
really
could take
appreciate
up
it.
probably 2 more hours and I'd be okay. Like, how has this been
I
almost two
know,
hours?
right?
That just blows my
So
mind.
anyone who has listened to any of the previous episodes of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness knows that I normally finish the podcast off by asking the guests 2 questions.
Okay.
I've modified them slightly for Chrissy, just simply because they're normally more focused around speaking to someone who has or is still doing that,
Mm.
first responder role. So slight modification, but similar in vein. So Chrissy, the first question I wanted to ask is, what do you do for yourself in order to be the person to hold space for any darkness that your husband exhibits or shares with you as a result of his first responder role?
Yeah. I used to think I just had to take it all on. That was the role of a spouse, right? And I'm thankful that um, he hasn't come home and really, put a lot of heaviness on me. Like at times, yes.
Yeah.
But that's why I also say it's important to have boundaries. Like, what do you talk about? What, how much can I hear? How much do I want to hear? I'm not a dumping ground, right? I haven't had to have those really, difficult conversations and boundaries. Although that's not true. I feel like, yeah, we definitely have. I was like, how many times do I have to hear about this politic or this, or, but at the same time, what's helped me the most is ensuring I have support,
Yeah.
right? Like I can't show up and support him if I equally don't have support around me. And that might not look like me then, going right to someone else and being like, you know what Cam just told me? It's like, it's really ensuring that I'm surrounding myself with people that make me feel good, that lift me up, that bring the best out in me, that I can go to and literally say anything to, and I don't have to worry about being judged, right? I think it's that, it's that support for myself, right? And as a coach, I think it'll be similar, right? Surrounding myself with people that can support me.
Yep.
As well, because we all need that. We can't just keep giving and giving and giving without also asking
Yep.
for something in return, in order for us to keep, being able to support the people that are, the people that are around us and the people that we choose to be around.
Yep. No, 100%. Totally understand all of that. And the second question is, what's one thing that you can think of that like you've done in the capacity of holding space for any of Cam's darkness that he's mentioned that's either been like incredibly helpful or beneficial that you've been able to do for him in that respect?
Yeah, that one's an easy one. Validating him. Like there's been times where like, this is a hard one where you raise your voice at your kids, right? And, he'll do it and I'd be like, those are my kids. Don't you do that. And instead I'm like, you seem really frustrated. Like, do you need a break? Right? Like moving from one to the other, it was a huge shift. It didn't happen overnight. But what I will say is that validation in the last year has changed our marriage, right? It has brought us closer. It has, it really is short and sweet. Validation is, I would say, he would say it again. Like if we had a newlywed game, we'd both be holding up that same sign, I feel. Yeah.
That's great. No, I love it. Yep. Validation and acknowledgement, they certainly go a long way. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, we will wrap it up from here. Chrissy, thank you so much for your
Mm.
time, your generosity, and your openness in sharing your story, sharing your experiences, just, showing that it's okay to show up as we are, and that it's okay to be a work in progress, because I think it helps everyone know that we're all the same. We're all just, sometimes swimming in the shit, and
Mm-hmm.
just figuring it out as we go along. So I really just,
We absolutely
thank you
do.
for your time, and it's been wonderful. So it's been lovely.
Oh, it's been an honor. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Thank you. All right.
All right.
This has been another
Talk soon.
episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness, a First Responder Mental Health podcast. I've been your host, Erin Jane. And as always, let me listen in a way you've never been heard. Cheers.